Views and opinions expressed within the following program are solely those of the individual. These views and opinions do not necessarily represent those of Shaw TV.
Hey Calgary, today's Thursday, January 17th. I'm Kevin Chorney, and this is Calgary Now. In every region of the country, there are political strongholds, ridings where one party reigns for decades, staying true blue, red, or orange, no matter what happens elsewhere in the country. Opposition parties make sincere attempts to sway voters, yet it's an uphill battle every election. Here in Calgary, progressive parties face two challenges: presenting a platform that can hold up against conservative rule and convincing voters to get out and vote in the first place. Is it a matter of presenting information that resonates with voters, or is electoral reform necessary when conservatives generally win with less than half of the vote? So there you have it. Our city bleeds conservative blue regardless of what level of government we look at. The recent Calgary Centre by-election saw the left-leaning candidates once again challenged for an NP seat that's been Tory blue for 40 plus years. And, well, it remained that way. So how is it that left-leaning so-called progressive political parties continue to chop the vote to such a degree that conservative candidates walk away without obtaining the popular vote? Is it time to put ideological similarities ahead of party politics? Or perhaps the fact these parties failed to obtain widespread election in our region is just due to the fact that, well, their policies are missing the mark? And if that's the case, is their struggle not indicative of a healthy democracy? We've got some great guests here to discuss just that, well, and some more. We do want to hear from you, so as always, you can get us at Calgary Now Show on Twitter, or give us a buzz at 403-539-6710. Stay with us.
People talk about vote splitting, people talk about progressives not having a voice. Progressives have a voice, and if progressives actually voted for that voice, voted with that voice, voted for that issue or that candidate that they liked, progressives would have an opportunity. However, the linking of parties to ideologies, the lack of imagination in the progressive movements to link up, to create engagement with youth is always going to be their death knell. Progressives really, truly want to make a difference in this country. They need to get together and come up with strategies that allow their candidates to engage with their communities.
Welcome back, Calgary. Fellas, let's get right to it. I'll get you to tell me who you are or what party you represent.
My name is Dan Mead. I ran in the Calgary Centre by-election for the NDP.
And I'm Will Munsey. I'm the president of the Alberta Party. I did run as a candidate, but now the president.
And my name's Kent Hare. I'm the MLA for Calgary Buffalo, and I'm an Alberta Liberal.
Alberta Liberal. Guys, thanks very much for being here. Let's get right to it. Is it problematic that time and time again we're seeing a conservative party, any party for that matter, winning elections without obtaining the popular vote? Dan, I'll start with you.
Well, it does give us an indication of what some people think is wrong with our electoral system, and I'd certainly be one of those people. What we've got is a first-past-the-post system that allows folks to become elected without getting the majority of the votes, and we have folks that get a significant vote percentage that have no representation in the House or in the legislature. And so, of course, I would think there's something wrong with that first-past-the-post system. But having said that, when we look at the Calgary Centre by-election and the last provincial election here in Alberta, there were no shortage of options for progressive voters, and yet the Conservatives still won with a healthy majority. So it does tell us something there. Yeah,
you would probably agree, I would think.
Well, I agree with a lot of that. I think that when you talk about proportional representation, though, that's a very, very difficult sell to a province that is really scared of upsetting the apple cart. We've got it good here. We could have it better, but we're scared of doing something that could change things up. We're scared of the potential for being better, I almost think.
We're scared of? You mean the constituents or party members?
I think almost everybody. Yeah. We're scared to be bold, number one, because, listen, I can take my son to hockey, I can take my daughters to dance, I can put food on the table, and this economy hums along. I'm worried about a lot of things, but I don't want to give that up by looking for something that could be a little bit better with the danger of it's something that I don't know. So it's a bit of an enemy,
That's
right?
really unknown.
You know, I think we're not really giving voters enough credit when we say that. Changing the way that we have our democracy doesn't suggest that somehow we're not going to be able to take our kids to hockey or that the economy is going to fall apart. It's that type of fear-based rhetoric that allows one party to stay in office for 42 years. I think we need to stop assuming that voters agree with that and give them the opportunity to make some real decisions and some real changes, because you know, this notion that the sky is going to fall if a party other than the Conservatives take over just hasn't been borne out over time all across the country, and I think it's a discourse that we've got to stop feeding into as people that care about this province and this country.
Kent, your thoughts?
Well, you
Majority government, pardon me, elections going to parties that aren't obtaining the majority vote.
Well, you asked me earlier if I was frustrated, having been a lifelong Albertan and being 43 years old. I've had the pleasure of having one government being in power for all but one of those years. And no doubt, in my view, it's time for progressive politics to be here in Alberta. But if we look at the electoral system, whether that is the problem, I'm not so sure. We have a first past the post system. We need to do what we can as political parties or progressives to find a way to win under the current system, because that system's not going to change until a different party gets to
I
power.
think that's the realistic attitude. It's not going to change. So it begs the question then, what is the way to ensure that the supporters are getting out, casting their votes?
Well, I've been on the record here as of late. In my view, if I look at Alberta politics the way they are, the political parties as they stand, those on the progressive side of things, the Alberta Party, the Alberta Liberals, the Greens, and the Alberta New Democrats, at this point in time, we essentially believe 90% of the same things. At 90%, I'm prepared to argue about the other 10% inside the tent. If we look at the current Progressive Conservative Party, there is more diversity in that party, in their right-wing extremes and their left-wing extreme, than there is in the entire four parties we have on the so-called progressive side. So in my view, it's time to give up rugged tribalism, for us to come together and see what we can do to win an election one of these days.
Interesting point. And I got to ask you, Dan, is that something feasible? At least, I want to talk about the recent Calgary Centre by-election. Now, it seems as though there was a lot of vote splitting. That's essentially what happened. It was clear that there was a good majority of people that wanted to vote. They split their vote amongst progressive parties. Is it time to talk about cooperation, about merging? Is merging a scary word?
You know, none of it is scary to me. None of those words are scary. There are a few things we need to keep in mind. The outcome of the election wasn't just about vote splitting. There are a ton of folks that decided not to come out and vote, in part because it was a by-election and so it didn't get the national hype, but in part because, you know, people are disengaged and disenchanted with our democracy right now. It's hard to blame them for that when we see a government that's being held in contempt of Parliament and passing 400-page budget bills. I have to be honest with you. I'm a political animal, and even I find that really discouraging and hard to engage with. And so it's not just about vote splitting. The thing that we need to think about when we talk about sharing content or merging, it cannot be done at the candidate level. Once the writ drops and the race is on, it is not fair of us to expect candidates that are running underneath a banner for a specific party and have worked hard and are continuing to do so, to stand up and say, you know what, for the good of the election, I'm going to step aside and endorse another party. That's not how this thing can work. If we're going to talk about really working together, it has to happen at the party level and at the party organizing level before the writ drops, before those names are on the ballot.
I agree 100% with Dan there. This has to happen before an election. There has to be a coming together of people as to what is the way forward, and you can't expect candidates who have worked hard, who have struggled, who have got their volunteers out to make a decision 3 days before an election to all of a sudden endorse somebody else. That's not how politics works.
Agreed. That's reality. So Will, tell me, where does the Alberta Party fit into all of this then?
Well, I think one of the interesting things, the Alberta Party is, the newer Alberta Party is not that old. And what it is essentially was a bunch of people who came from other parties already, who had made those decisions on their own, that the party labels of NDP or Liberal or Wild Rose or Conservative, what we wanted to do was share values and ideas rather than ideologies. So I dropped the label Green. I had run as a Green candidate. I have friends who ran as PCs. And what we were about was sharing the ideas. And so we dropped those names and we adopted one we thought was nonpartisan, that other people could could come to. And when both these gentlemen talk about building that tent for us to share these values and ideas, I think essentially that's what we tried to do. That was the first stage. Well, the second stage, that's what we're talking about here. So, you know, the Alberta Party really, that's what we tried to do in the first place. So we only had a 2-year start before we went to an election. And it was pretty tough going, I'll be honest with you.
I'll give you a moment to actually maybe clarify for people a bit more about the party. It used to be a lot of hardline conservatives, was it not, at one point?
Well, it really was a provincial response to Preston Manning's reform movement, right? And so what we had in common with that, I was agreeing there was progressive conservatives, was the grassroots nature of it. It was really about people coming, and that's the Preston Manning philosophy. So many people came over to that, what was essentially a right so-called party, Greens, progressive conservatives, liberals, that, you know, it's a democracy. We got sitting on the board and we had more members, and so we changed policy, we changed the Constitution, and essentially that tent that these gentlemen are talking about is built. It's ready to go.
I'm not sure that I completely agree on a few points. One of them is that I think if we decide to sum down the total of the impact Preston Manning had on Canadian politics to a grassroots endeavor, we're really not doing justice to what truly happened in this country. And the other thing is that when we talk about parties coming together and progressives working together, it's odd that the answer would be starting something else. And so there's a little tension there for me. On one hand, I think it's great, and I think more voices are better. I think making the conversation bigger, not smaller, makes a ton of sense to me. And on the other hand, if the intention is to really bring people together, starting something new, well, that's got to be the toughest way to do that. Well, as opposed to starting from a party that's got, has infrastructure and has organizational capital and says, hey, you know what, we're going to talk about policy, we're going to talk about bringing people together, but we're not starting over because that's really hard.
I'd like to address that.
Yes,
I'll
please
give Kent a chance here first, and then I'll.
Well, in my view, it's very difficult to start something new. It doesn't mean it hasn't worked before. We've seen in the Saskatchewan Party where essentially the conservative or the progressive conservatives went away, or more rightly went to jail, and the Liberals and the remaining PCs joined together to form a new party. I guess that's a model of success. I would like to see in the Alberta context some way to bring the existing organizations together. In fact, all the organizations. There's great people in the Alberta Liberals. There's fabulous people in the New Democrats. A lot of my friends are in the Alberta Party, and I respect the heck out of the Green Party, their leader, and what they've done. But all of these people have so much talent, and imagine what we could do together. So that's why I like the organizational approach, is that people are tied to brands, okay? They're tied to their political team. They're tied to their friends being there. So you have to meld these organizations together somehow. And by all means, I'm not sure how to do it, but I like the fact that discussion's happening, and it's happening with New Democrats, Alberta Party people, Green members, and Alberta Liberals at this time. It can't hurt to talk about it. Heck, we've been 92 years out of power. New Democrats have never been to power. Well, the Alberta Party hasn't quite made it there yet. So maybe there's a solution where we're all in it together that maybe we can get there.
To put you on the spot then, Will.
Yeah.
Well, first off, please do. Respond.
Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you, as the president of the Alberta Party and someone who came right in at the very beginning of the new version, I'm not even wedded to the name, okay? But why we chose this name was because, and I'll have to be frank, and both of these gentlemen may disagree with me, is I don't see the potential for Albertans voting for a new Democratic Party to govern. And I'm afraid that I don't see a 93-year history of the lack of success is going there either. So we chose the name because it doesn't have the federal baggage and it doesn't have the historical baggage. So, but even that said, you know, if we're talking about ideas and values, I'm not even wedded to the name. I'm prepared for the discussion, and I'm going to go one further. Kent said he named all those parties, but he forgot. There are a lot of good people in the progressive conservative government of Alberta, and there's a lot of fine people out there who support that party. 42 years has made it entitled, and we have to get rid of that. But those people are good people.
I'm gonna jump to a quick break here, Kent. We'll let you throw it down just a sec here. Calgary, stay with us. Enjoy our resident rant pack. We'll be right back.
Thank you. Voting in this province is so incredibly interesting, especially when we see low voter turnout, and people who do turn out voting for the same parties all the time, regardless of them complaining and complaining and complaining. And the problem is that the up and coming other parties aren't differentiating themselves anyway, and they're not targeting that portion of the population that they need to, which is about 500,000 people in Calgary who are under 40 and don't know anything about them. They're not getting any traction with their voter base, and it's frustrating to watch because it would be nice to see a change.
As far as getting the progressive parties to get some sort of foothold in Alberta in general, being that the Conservatives have been here for 44 years, I do think they need to centralize and stop calling themselves the Green Party or having the perception of the NDP. The NDP always has this thing of saying, we're going to fix everything without increasing your tax. Where the hell is that money going to come from? Money just doesn't appear in midair. You can't just print more of it and it's there. Being an actual Conservative myself, I really don't care what the other parties do. I'm all for checks and balances, but as far as I'm concerned, the last 44 years of Alberta have been pretty darn good.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Welcome back, Calgary. Tonight we're talking progressive politics in the region. Now, Kent, I'll give you an opportunity to answer to Will there, talking about party unity and maybe even melding things together.
Well, if we're looking at electoral success here in Alberta, for the last 84 years, there's only been 2 parties that have ever won. Okay, so there hasn't been a wide diversity of parties winning. So it hasn't only been my party who has won or Dan's party who hasn't won. We've had a long list of also-ran, startups, and the like that have gone. I think to our testament, we've managed to stick around for 92 years in the political landscape, as well as New Democrats. That might actually be a feather in our cap. But moving on to what to do next. And that's where what gives us the best chance to form government.
I gotta throw my 2 cents in here, though. I understand, and that's definitely grounds for praise. I mean, it's a good run. You've been around for a long time, but at the end of the day, does it not come down to seats, guys? Is that not what we're after? Ultimately, is seats.
Elections are about winning, and
right.
If you don't win, well, you don't get to influence that much policy. I love my role as an opposition MLA. I wake up every day and serve my constituents. I can find no greater joy in a role that I am currently playing. Nevertheless, I would like to see progressive politics at the big kids table, sitting on the government side, actually implementing policy to take this great province forward.
There are a few things, though, that we need to keep in mind, and it's slightly different provincially than it is federally. Provincially, I do agree that we've got an awful lot in common, and so the conversation about divergence in party politics on the progressive side maybe isn't as fruitful as it could be, and that's why I'm really in favor of having conversations about how people that self-identify as progressive work together in Alberta. Federally, however, it's a very, very different situation. When we talk about progressive politics, it would be very, very easy to argue that there's really only one progressive party in federal politics in Canada today, and that's the NDP. And so when folks talk about progressive parties coming together, it's very, very difficult for me, because when we look at the parties that have been in power in our country's history, the Liberals like to call themselves progressive federally. We just haven't seen it. The cuts that were done by the Liberals in the 90s were astounding. They beat out even the cuts of Conservative-era prime ministers. And so provincially, this is a very fruitful conversation and one that is really, really valid. Federally, however, we haven't had a long-term government in place for 40 and 42 years. And some specific seats we have, like in Calgary Centre. But I do think the conversation needs to be very, very different federally than it is provincially.
Yeah, clearly.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I know I'm harping on it, but that was really one of the very reasons. That identification, it isn't just brands within the province and their historical traditions, it's the connections that they have with federal politics. And we don't have that connection. And I think that's an important thing, because that really clearly what Dan is saying is exactly correct, is that this is a province and we have to have this conversation without any fear of what's happening outside, really wide open.
And then the other side of this conversation is this. What we're talking about, elections are about winning, Kent. I couldn't agree more. As the recent loser of an election, I feel it deeply. However, there is something more to politics than just getting seats. There's something more to an election than just winning. It's not about making sure that the Progressive Conservative Party, the Conservative Party of Canada, loses. It's about what value set is represented by those that do win. And while, again, in Alberta, it's possible that all of us progressives, such as we are, self-identify that way and have a value set that would be represented similarly were one of us the Premier of the province. Federally, that still isn't the case. And so while we have this discussion about working together leading into the next provincial election, let's make sure what we're trying to do isn't make sure somebody else loses, but we make sure we've got a value set that wins.
Well, Dan, you're perfectly correct, and that's why I would welcome a progressive conservative government that was actually progressive. I might be one of those people out there who was actually hopeful that day would come under our current premier. Sadly, in my time in the legislature, I haven't seen that progressive side of her come out. Accordingly, we gentlemen here and people of this province got to say, what is real progressive politics? What does that mean? I don't see it happening up there in the Alberta legislature. So that means we need to find ourselves, get in our game, and find a way that we can do better. And that means winning elections.
Maybe it comes down then to informing people. So then, what exactly is progressive politics?
Well, in my view, it's three things. Individual freedom. We don't base our judgment of people on who they love or who they choose to engage with. The second thing, it's equality of opportunity, ensuring all children, whether they're born of a rich family or a poor family, get opportunities to be in school, to get health care, whether you're wealthy or poor. Sure. Third thing is fairness to future generations, and this is very important too in the Alberta context. Fairness in terms of the environmental landscape we leave behind, and fairness to how much of this oil wealth that we leave to them. In my view, we haven't done very good jobs on the last two accounts in particular in this province. And that's what a progressive looks like to me.
Specifically, Will, the Alberta Party.
Well, listen, I love what I'm going to steal what Kent said because it's so darn good.
That's all right. You're
it's
allowed.
Okay. We're friends, so we'll call it borrowing. But I think essentially progressive politics, and I really don't like the word progressive because I think it's become a target word anyway. But it's people who believe that government is not an evil. It's not an impediment to your society, to having a fair society. That government, we all recognize it can be corrupt, it can be lackadaisical, it can be non-creative, but it has the potential to be a leveler. It has the potential to protect and regulate and make a level playing field for all of us. That's what I think people who are progressives think. The government has the potential to be a force for good in your society.
I want to talk a bit about electoral reform. Now, I know there's probably not too much potential for it here, but it does happen around the world in other countries. Mm-hmm. Is it time for people to at least bring it to the table and start discussing potential electoral reform? You mentioned the first past the post system, which we've always utilized, of course. Is it time for maybe, rank voting systems, preferential system? Your thoughts, guys?
I think there's no question. I think what we really need to be moving to is what I would call a mixed proportional representation system. And so it moves away from that first past the post system, gives people the opportunity to make sure that parties and individual parties that get a lower percentage of the vote but still are doing relatively well have seats in the House of Commons or the legislature. What that would allow us to do is a number of things, making sure that voters in Canada feel as though their values are represented and their concerns are represented in the legislature and the House of Commons means that we're going to get more voters. And that really should be what the goal of a democracy is, to make sure that the community is engaged, that during election time, voters say, hey, you know what, I care about this, I care about it enough to learn, and I care about it enough to come on out and vote. If we had a really high voter turnout in this country and in this province, the outcome would, for me, be valid no matter who won. And then if a party remained in power for 42, 45 years, but we had a high voter turnout, I would be the person sitting here saying, you know what, my values don't represent the values that people want in that riding. I lost, but most people voted. I can live with that. Doesn't mean my values are going to change. It doesn't mean how I feel about issues are going to change. But it makes me say, hey, you know what, I lost. I lost, and that's okay. As opposed to a situation that we have now where so few voters are coming out. People just aren't engaged in their democracy. In a national level, there's no question that our democracy is broken. And people just don't seem to care enough to get out and change that. And so we need to do anything we can to make sure people are engaged.
I want to talk about that just maybe after the next break. We will touch a little bit on just the deplorable conditions of people. Voter apathy is ridiculous. But Will, I want to let you weigh in. Is it time for voter reform or is it time for ranked voting system?
I think that this is a very tough discussion to have. And one of the things I think we need to do as progressives is to have some tough discussions. We need to be bold. We need to have the discussion. I don't know what kind of a system, a mixed proportional representation system, but let's put it on the table. And that's one of the things that we lack. We lack boldness, and we have to find that. And I think it's a discussion worth having. I want to have it. I want to hear different kinds of systems, and we'll let Albertans decide. And I think it's possibly one of the first places that we can actually collaborate.
Well, I've been long on the record of saying mixed proportional representation makes sense. I believe it allows for more political diversity, and it actually enables the minority to influence the majority situation in a parliamentary setting. In the first past the post system, the government of the day can and usually does ignores the opposition. In that other system, it's more creative, more fluid, more ideas flow across the aisle, so to speak, and in my view would open up a lot of opportunities for Albertans and Canadians as a whole if we went that way.
Well, doesn't it also, there's other benefits as well. I mean, just vote splitting. You know, essentially you're eliminating that. If you've got the top 3 vote getters and it's based on averages,
You know,
it seems to make a bit of sense.
a few things that you're hinting at there around voter apathy and vote splitting are interesting to me. First of all, I don't think there's such thing as apathy. I think it's a really judgmental term. To suggest that somebody else is apathetic, really what I'm saying is that they don't care about what I want them to care about. Nobody's apathetic about how they get to work in the morning or how they put food on the table. And so as people that are interested in politics and people that are politicians that are in government, it's our job to make sure that people care about the things that we feel are important to them. And if people aren't caring about the things that we're doing and the things that we're talking about, it's entirely possible that we're doing the wrong things.
You know what I
and
think
we're
it is?
talking
I'm
about
going to
the
cut you
wrong
off.
things.
As a voter, people are lazy. You know, and I don't know if, I'm sure I'm going to catch some flack for that, but people are lazy. They don't want to learn about parties that are running. They don't want to take the time, a lot of the time, to even show up and vote.
It's not the case everywhere. So it's just that people are lazy because they don't vote. It's suggesting that somehow Canadians are inherently lazy as it comes to their democracy, and I don't believe that. What we do have, however, is a system where negative campaigning, negative ads, and real voter suppression on the national level is taking people out of the democratic process, taking people out of conversations that matter to them. If we really have the ability to make sure people understand these decisions that are made in government, this election matters to you, and how you put food on the table, and how you get to work in the morning, and the things that you care about are represented in the House of Commons and in the legislature, I think voter rates are going to go
I'm
up.
going to take a quick break, folks. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
I think when it comes to, getting this political information, at least to resonate with somebody in my age group, kind of the younger demographics, I just feel like there should be a more straightforward, engaging way to kind of get this out to the youth. The younger demographics make up a huge percent of Calgarians, Albertans, and that whole thing. I just think that if there was just a more concise, engaging, exciting way to find out more about politics and, kind of get more educated and involved, I'd be more open to it. But at this point, it just seems there's so much convoluted information out there that it makes it even discouraging to try to learn more about it.
I think progressive parties need to do a better job of putting themselves out there and being a clear alternative. The Conservative Party has done a good job ruling, but in specific areas. So in the economy, the Conservatives have done a very good job running the province. But there are other factors, other things that people care about in this province that a third party or a second party, a strong opposition, could do a good job in pointing out the problems too. It takes a long time to establish yourself as a political entity or as a franchise in any market. And I think if they keep going, if they keep a sustained message, there will be a point in time where people will listen and vote for them.
Something like that, right? Folks, we're going to jump right into our random question to wrap things up here. Now, fellas, the way this works, I honestly have no idea what's on these cards. Last week's question was about the beard. So we'll see where this goes.
I'm going to take the middle one.
The middle one it is. Without further ado, do you think the city does a good enough job cleaning up after snowstorms?
That's a very difficult question. I live right downtown, and in my view, my streets are usually clean, but that's from people driving on them. So I'm going to remain agnostic on it and say they're pretty good where I live. I don't know about where you live.
Don't comment where you don't live. I can understand that. What do you think, Will? So you
Hey, I'm from New Sarepta. I'm the only guy on my street, so if the snow cleaning's not done, it's me. So I think I do a good job.
Fair enough.
I'm from St. John's, Newfoundland. We get a ton of snow. And so when I moved here to Calgary, I couldn't believe all the discussion about whether or not we're doing a good job cleaning the streets or any of those things. It's not a complicated thing. The snow falls from the sky, it falls on the street, and then we push it off the side so we can all drive on it.
Yep.
I don't understand why this conversation is so difficult in Calgary, why it's been going on for so many years.
I think you're doing a good job. I think the city's doing a really good job, especially as of late. Folks, that's essentially all the time we have. We do thank you very much for joining us. Join us again next week, same time, 6:30 here on Shaw TV Calgary.